Did you know that Guelph is the first city in Canada to certify its operations to the ISO 50001 Energy Management System standard? BSI offers this standard, used globally by organizations to manage and reduce energy use. ISO 50001 is a great framework for implementing an energy management system. From large retailers to small businesses, it helps organizations become more resilient against energy costs. Whether you aim to reduce costs, comply with legislation, or increase sustainability, implementing the standard provides an efficient approach, and BSI is here to support you on this journey. Learn more at www.bsigroup.com/50001-US.
Good afternoon. My name is Karen Schunk with the Energy Management Association. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar and thank the BSI Group for sponsoring today's session. A few items before we get started. Presenters will periodically answer questions, so we encourage you to submit them at any time using the Q&A button. If you're experiencing technical problems during the webinar, please use the chat function and our technical expert, William, will assist you. This presentation is being recorded and will be available for viewing in 1 week. In terms of continuing education credit, everyone in attendance for the full webinar will receive a certificate of attendance sent to their email within 24 hours. And finally, if you're a certified CXA or EMP, your CEUs for attending our webinar will be automatically uploaded to your respective portals a few days after the webinar. Today's webinar is Energizing Excellence, Unveiling the ISO 50001 Success Story of the City of Guelph. Guelph is located in Western Ontario, is the first city in Canada to certify its entire operations to the ISO 50001 Energy Management System standard. Our speakers are Jim Moran with BSI Group Canada and Tijo Joseph, Project Manager with the Corporate Energy and Climate Change Group of the City of Guelph. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us as we learn about the challenges faced and strategies employed by the City of Guelph in their journey. And with that, I'll hand it off to our experts, Jim and Tijo, to kick us off.
Thanks very much, Karen. Glad to have everybody along today. And Tijo, I see we're all ready to go. We've got just a couple of things to get started with. As Karen mentioned, feel free anytime during the presentation to put some questions into the chat box, and Will is going to start our first poll for us. Take it away, Will. And there's the poll question. Just pick out if any of these titles fit you. Just click on them, and if we don't happen to have a title that matches your position, just type it into the chat box so that we'll have an idea who's here and maybe be able to aim some of our comments today. And Tijo, how are things in Guelph today?
Well, thanks, Jim. Good day, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invite, EMA and BSI. Sunny, I should say, Jim. So a good day out for sure.
It's definitely looking good here. Thanks. So if Will could show us the results of the poll, that would be fantastic. So we've got some top management here. Energy Systems Manager, generic management systems manager, maybe quality, environmental, health and safety, and the sustainability manager. This is great. They mentioned resilience in that tape at the beginning. And then can you give us some of the titles, Will, that came into the chat box? I don't know if he's there. Actually, I will look in the chat box myself. No information there. That's okay. Thanks very much. And thanks to all of you for taking time out of your busy days to join us today. And if you have any friends who couldn't make it, if they signed up, they'll be getting a copy of the presentation after. And they'll also have the opportunity to answer a wonderful skill testing quiz. So to get us started, just give you an idea of what we'll be talking about today. we'll start out by having Tijo tell us why the City of Guelph decided to head on to the down the road of ISO 50001. Then in the second section, we'll talk a little bit about how they did it, what their implementation journey was like. And then we'll finish up with insights and lessons learned. Even though they've just finished the implementation, it'll set the stage maybe for a repeat of this particular webinar next year after they've had a chance to use it. So to get us started, Tijo, the word resilient came up in that introduction, and other standards can certainly help companies or organizations like yours become resilient. ISO 14001, ISO 22301, the business continuity standard. How was it that the City of Guelph chose ISO 50001?
Yes. So I would say it's a global standard that directly relates to energy management systems.
Mm-hmm.
It's specific around that. So that drove looking at that standard. There was some awareness about the standard within the team that spearheaded this initiative, and so that certainly helped in terms of being aware about that. Uh, beyond beyond that, we see the standard as providing organizations across the spectrum, really, whether it's commercial, industrial, across the board,
Mm-hmm.
with that framework for developing an energy management system. And the standard has specific requirements, right from implementing all through to the continual improvement aspect as well. So the element of the standard being based on the plan to check act, what's referred to as the PDCA, continual improvement framework, which is a recognized model for carrying out change. That really drove looking at the standard and using that as a basis of developing the energy management system.
Great, thanks. PDCA has been around, I think, since the middle 40s or late 40s when it was introduced to the world by Deming. And it certainly withstood the test of time completely. And for our listeners, you and I will be going into that in a bit more detail in the second section when we actually see how you applied Plan, Do, Check, Act to this actual exercise. And you mentioned drivers. What were the main drivers for the City of Guelph to decide to go down this path?
Okay. So at a very high level, embedded within the city's community plan and the corporation's strategic plan are various priorities and initiatives.
Mm-hmm.
And one of that is being a leader in climate action. So, and these priorities and initiatives, so at a high level, then there's a question of how do we achieve this? And so it is around that equation that we had to, as an organization, consider the initiative of reducing energy use,
Mm-hmm.
and as well, very key, because the city has signed up to the Race to Zero initiative, reducing
Mm-hmm.
greenhouse gas emissions as well. And as I alluded to in the opening answer that I provided, so it was trying to look at that initiative and then being able to take a systematic approach towards managing and as well, very key, continually improving performance across city assets. So having the standard and that being the key driver was the link.
Excellent. Thanks very much. The this whole concept of having some kind of structure is actually the foundation for all, not only ISO standards that come out of Geneva, but BSI themselves have tens of thousands of standards that they have available for the world. And anytime you can put some structure to any kind of activity, process, whatever, it certainly does improve the chances of getting the right outcome. If you're just wading into something like this with your fingers crossed and hope everybody kind of comes along and gets the idea, then you're really putting a lot of things at risk. It's good to hear about the climate action initiative too, and having some kind of eyeball or some kind of long view or vision of being a world leader in this area, and it's sure going to make a you'll be a great example for other municipalities who want to go down this road or at least thinking about it. And just to finish off this part of the presentation today, uh, what kind of top management support did you have for the project?
Um, Top management support, um, I would say, one of the very vital pieces, and we clearly had that at the city. Broadly around, I would say around two components. One, providing the leadership that is required.
Mm-hmm.
This is a corporate-wide initiative, and therefore there's the bind that's required, leadership to drive this, and then the other component being providing resources in order to be able to implement that. So I would emphasize top management support is very vital, and the standard clearly is mm, making mention of that around clause requirements in terms of what's expected from top management. Um, so this includes just beyond the initial commitment. I would
Mm-hmm.
say there has to be ongoing interest and ongoing support from top management in order to be able to implement an energy management system
Mm-hmm.
successfully.
And in my experience, the 32 years I've had at building these systems, I've discovered that if the top management support isn't there, the whole project has very little chance of success. And the other part of that support really needs to be for anybody here who's thinking about moving in this direction. Not only do you need the support in terms of, as Tijo mentioned, the people, the time, the finances, the top management really needs to have a thorough understanding of what it means to build a management system and what has to be in the management system. You can't assign it to somebody at sort of an administrative or clerk level and hope they can get it done on the corner of their desk in their spare time. This is a major project for any organization, and then in having top management take a training course from BSI on ISO 50001 on the actual standard is certainly something that I think is quite vital. Thanks, Tijo. And Will, we have another poll if you're available. There we are. Thanks. So, are you thinking about implementing an energy management system, an ENMS? If you could pick one of these for us, no, we're at the mercy of the weather, and you might even say we're at the mercy of the weather, and we don't really think it'd be of any value to us. Or yes, we want to improve our energy performance. Yes, but we don't have any top management support. We want to assure our stakeholders and improve our ESG score, and we want to create a framework for continual improvement. Tijo, you mentioned that, and it's of course one of the pillars of all the ISO standards that I work with in terms of why do it, and of course continually improving is definitely something And if you have another reason, please feel free to use the chat box. And I'll just ask Karen a quick question. Has anybody posed any questions for us yet, Karen?
Hi, Jim. No, we don't
Yes.
have any. We don't have any questions about the content.
Okay.
And I
Okay.
would just say, if you are going to use the other option, please put your responses into the Q&A.
Yes. Thanks. Thanks very much. And if there's enough responses in there, Will, we can go ahead and close the poll. And the answer, oh, good. We're at the mercy of the weather. And just for the group of you who chose that particular answer, it is a common feeling in countries like ours with what we might refer to as rather extreme weather. I mean, compared to Florida. And sometimes we feel there's just nothing we can do, but believe me, there is always something that you can do. So if you have a chance, you might start with something like an energy audit just to see where you're actually at, get some numbers to see, get something in substantial, something real, and it could give you a starting point. Want to improve energy performance, 27%. Don't have top management, 11%. So perhaps after today, you might have some ideas you can send off to top management. And by all means, check with BSI, find out what some of their statistics are, some of their information is on how their ISO 50001 clients have fared. Blue Circle in Bowmanville had some spectacular results, $250,000 in the first year in savings, things like that. And we've got 18%, almost a fifth of the audience want to create a framework for continual improvement. And there we go. Thanks very much. If we could close that poll, I can close it from my side. Good news. So let's get into the second part, Tijo.
Sure.
And this was the implementation journey that you folks went on. You mentioned it before, the plan, do, check, act approach. How did you choose, in the planning stage, identify an opportunity, plan a change? We've talked before about how important it is to have a team. How did you go about choosing the team?
Yeah, as you mentioned, yeah, absolutely. Team, very important. The teamwork, the cross-functional collaboration that is required, also very relevant. In the case of the city, we already had a team in place that was primarily executing energy management activities across the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So, right from energy conservation, energy efficiency, renewable energy projects, a team was involved with working on on several of those projects across the corporation's facilities. So when it came to um, implementation and in relation to the standard, having that team, the same team involved with this project was assigned the task of implementing and and operating the energy management system. So we had to start that way. We number close to six in terms of our overall
Mm-hmm.
strength in terms of numbers as the core team. And then we also have a representation from the executive team, and as well supplemented by personnel from other specialized functions, personnel that are familiar with the BAS, for example, personnel
Mm-hmm.
from building maintenance, personnel from fleet services. And together, this group has overall oversight over the city's energy management system.
Mm-hmm. Did you kind of guide the team, or did they have a team leader? How did that part work?
Yeah, so we have a manager that
Mm-hmm.
is responsible for driving, and then the team members work along with that manager. So direction is set, and then the team brainstorms around that, and we take it forward that way.
Excellent. I imagine the city of Guelph has had hundreds, and if not thousands, of projects they've worked on. You probably got a pretty good team of project managers, and it would make sense to me that to use just kind of a project management approach, milestones, people's responsibilities, and that kind of thing. It can certainly help in a situation like this. And how did you choose the scope? One of the requirements of all ISO standards that I've ever worked with, usually nowadays in clause 5.3, the scope. No, that's the organizational structure. 5.2 is just how do you 4.2? How do you choose, or 4.3? How do you choose the scope? Did you choose? How did you decide how big to make this management system?
Yeah, and that was one that we had to brainstorm very clearly, understanding that the scope and how it's defined, the scope and the boundary for that matter, how it's defined clearly defines the level of resourcing,
Mm,
the remit of what needs to be looked at, and data capture points, whether it's uh, the processes that have to be documented, assessed from an energy review perspective,
mm-hmm.
or for that matter, establishing the significant energy uses.
Ah,
But we
yes.
finally decided to, ambitious as is, to try and have the energy management system at a corporate-wide level, so across all uh, the corporation's assets. Now, the city provides municipal services to city residents, with our core services extending right from public transit, um, wastewater treatment, water supply and distribution, and and so forth. So waste management, and then we have the fleet equipment as well on that. So there's a plethora of services
Mm-hmm.
that the city offers. So that became the starting point to say we have to define the scope around this,
Mm-hmm.
but where energy use or energy generation has a relation or a bearing. So in short, the scope stemmed from this municipal services that the city is offering, and it comprises of all activities,
Mm,
operations, and services that consume energy
hmm.
or that generate uh, energy in the process of delivering this municipal services. So that set the stone as far as the scope.
And I presume that you must have decided on some kind of threshold. If it was just a room in a back room in a storage area that had one light bulb, obviously that, even though it might be included in the physical scope, you'd have to decide when you say uses energy, what kind of energy amount we're talking about, which brings me to the question about establishing targets. How did you establish targets? And all of the ISO standards, section 9 is about performance evaluation and setting targets and energy targets as well. How did that come about?
With regards to targets, so the city already has objectives at a high level, two
Mm-hmm.
key ones. One, I mentioned the Race to Zero initiative that the city has signed up to. That is reducing greenhouse gas emissions across the community to net zero by the year 2050.
Mm-hmm.
And the second is um, energy sourcing through renewable energy sources at 100% by 2050. So we have the greenhouse gas reduction aspect, and we have the renewable energy sourcing aspect. So at a broad level, these objectives um, set the basis for the targets that followed. And so I'll give an example of a target. We have, for the first cycle at least of the energy management system implementation, we have a target of converting a certain percentage, a certain number of our fleet vehicles to electrified vehicles. So that is a target as it stands for the city as far as the energy management system.
Oh, thanks. It's. I hope the listeners can see the relationship between the continual improvement you mentioned and how it's. You'd have to really set some measurable. Everybody's heard the word SMART or the acronym SMART: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time limited goals to try to reach. And clearly, the ones that you just described to us fit right into your long term, your sort of your higher vision. Thanks very much. So if we went to the next phase, the doing phase, um, I would I be right in assuming that you probably had to start with some kind of awareness campaign for the whole organization to make people to get people on board? Did you do some kind of sort of pre-work with people or some kind of awareness that they could start to become familiar with what you're trying to do, or how did that work?
Yeah, as well. On the awareness piece, the core team defined the communication processes both for external and internal communications,
Mm-hmm.
meaning the what is to be communicated, at what frequency,
Ah.
through what means, with whom, and uh, the documentation retention part, which of course the standard is requiring for. So this focus in terms of understanding that it is a clause requirement within the standard, and then as well understanding that 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 employee engagement is also again very critical.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's a necessity. It's not um, not just from the clause requirement perspective that the standard is calling for, but clearly for this to be successful, it's beyond just a good to have. It's a must have.
It
Uh,
seems it's like, and it sounds like everything you talked about so far would definitely help create what you and I might call an energy awareness or an energy culture. An energy awareness culture. You can't. In fact, you could go into an organization like yours and ask the question, who's responsible for energy management in our organization? And the non-enlightened would say Tijo is. The enlightened would say I am. I'm part of the whole unit that uses energy, and I'm part of the processes that lead to energy use. I do things that use energy, and if an organization like yours has a good awareness campaign, you talked about internal and external communications, then you can see how this would kind of build up or build some cohesiveness maybe in people's outlook, and hopefully right down into the purchasing area where you're making careful choices on the equipment that you're purchasing to make sure it's using the least amount of energy possible. And speaking of processes, did you already have any kind of procedures or processes in place to handle? You mentioned this earlier, your significant energy use areas.
yeah, so significant energy use, referred acronym being SCU, That was not something that we had in place before implementing and conforming to the ISO 50001 standard. That was one of those new
Mm.
nomenclatures that came to our awareness. Terms like energy, or the difference between energy use and energy consumption, for
Mm-hmm.
example. So also, all those were new learnings from implementing the standard. So coming back to SEU, significant energy use, um, we didn't have any defined prior to. So it became an exercise of looking at what the standard is defining an SEU to be. And the standard defines an SEU to be energy use that has associated with it substantial energy consumption,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, or if there's if there's a potential for that energy use to achieve significant energy reduction. And
Mm.
in the city's case, we tied that into greenhouse gas emission reduction as well, because we had that greenhouse gas reduction goal as well. So then it became a case of trying to identify across our corporate assets what
Mm-hmm.
are the energy use centers, and what are the ones that offer that potential for significant energy consumption reduction. And we went through a ranking process, looking at our utility accounts at a
Mm-hmm.
site level. So that was a starting point, and um, picked up the top five in
Ah.
terms of our energy use centers. And street lighting stood out as
Huh.
one among that five. So hence that became a SEU that we defined.
That's excellent. Thanks. And again, as with all standards, it gave you some structure to work with rather than just simply hoping you could find the most energy hungry activities that you do. And then that could also help tie in with the targets we were talking about as well. Once you know what they are and once you've got them quantified, then you can figure out some sort of action plan to either make sure they don't get radically higher over time or maybe in some cases even reducing. So do these significant energy uses or even any other areas, did this approach to building this system have any impact on your procurement process? Was there anything there that changed from before you started down this path?
Not not so much, and not really. On the procurement side, we already have a purchasing bylaw
Oh.
that uh, guides the procurement aspects across what we procure as a corporation. And environmental sustainability is already a key guiding principle within
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
uh, purchasing bylaw. So when the city procures goods and services, the city endeavors to look at the lens of what's the life cycle environmental impact
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
for that specific good or for that specific service, so that the city can endeavor, because there are other components where we have to look at the cost aspect and so forth. We are in the public sector. There's that accountability,
Yeah.
ensuring taxpayer dollars are put the most value. So there are other elements to look at as well. But wherever possible, the city is striving to compare and procure goods and services that have, on a life cycle basis, a lower footprint. So that was already in place, but we have, as a result of procurement being defined clearly in the standard as one of those components to be looked at. As part of our current cycle, we intend to, again, in discussion with the procurement department, see and look at other elements that we could incorporate as part of the procurement, whether it's outward RFP communication and embedding that within those documents in terms of maybe more stringent requirements,
Mm-hmm.
maybe qualifying that. So that's an ongoing discussion right now in terms of enhancing that. But I would say nothing that changed as far as the status quo on where we were before and after implementation.
Oh, excellent. Well, it would make sense that you'd try to find the most energy efficient pieces of equipment you could, just from the standpoint of, like you said earlier, using the taxpayers' money as well as possible. Well, thanks. So that takes care of the planning and the doing pretty well. When we get to the checking, we what milestones did you use to help you decide if the project was going along the way you wanted it to?
Yeah. So if we look at it from a lens of a project, let's say it's a renewable energy project,
Mm-hmm.
and let's say that renewable energy project installing a solar PV. I'm working on one right now, for example, and there's the overall 100 RE target, so achieving 100% of the corporation's energy needs from renewable energy sources. That clearly is a KPI at a very broad level. And then against that, um, connecting the solar PV system
Mm-hmm.
to the grid, and then being able to account for that against that 100% overarching KPI that we have. That's on the how does it compare to what we are striving to achieve, and evaluating that. What kind of KW would be add on to as a result of bringing on board this solar PV system into the city's generating sites equation. And from a project perspective, clearly, as would we have a project management office that's guided by the PMP
Mm-hmm.
um, guidelines, and so with that as reference, there are metrics around the success of the project from a cost, timeliness,
Mm-hmm.
resourcing perspective, etc. So just an example for a solar PV project. Now, different if it's a GHG reduction project, in which case the component would be energy savings achieved, but more importantly, the associated GHG reduction. So in the province, the grid is relatively clean, as we like to call it,
Mm-hmm.
with not much of fossil fuel attributable sources within the grid. So reduction on the electricity reduction side may not so much reflect in terms of a dent as far as that GHG reduction. But fuel switching, electrification, switching from natural gas, or for that matter, gasoline or diesel consumption to
Mm-hmm.
to the grid, considering the grid is definitely much cleaner, makes sense from a GHG reduction and achieves the most reduction. Um, so
and
again,
all
success
and
there. Yeah.
Thanks. And all measurable. And this is really the part of the key here is making sure you have milestones that are measurable. So after you did this measuring and did the checking, what would you say during the project? What kinds of can you give us some examples of anything that you actually improved? Since the acting phase is all about continual improvement, I mean, it's a vast organization. Even just the square miles, the hundreds of systems you have in place. Were there any things that stood out to you that you were able to actually improve during the implementation of this, or maybe during the end of the implementation of the management system?
Yeah. So um, under the act phase, we after implementation, the core team deciding, okay, now we have switch over to the act phase.
Mm-hmm.
We conducted an internal audit. That was the starting point of trying to establish in relations and and I'm speaking specifically to the conformance with the standard, right, from a compliance perspective. So
Mm-hmm.
looking at what the standards requiring for internal audit is called for, but then through that process, what are the clause requirements specifically? And
Mm-hmm.
having gone through this implementation process, how have we been able to respond to those clause requirements? So
Mm-hmm.
we have an energy policy in place now. We didn't have an energy policy at the start. We certainly had, like I alluded to in the opening uh, statements I made, we have a city community plan, a city strategic plan, but nothing that the corporation has as a statement officially recognizing the energy management system as a corporate wide initiative. So
Mm-hmm.
we didn't have that during that, but now looking through it from the internal audit perspective, we recognize that the policy is now in place. So it is
Mm-hmm.
a check against that. But it's a question of what about the communication of the policy? Have we disseminated across the organization? Is there awareness about that, and so forth? So through the internal audit exercise, there was an opportunity to identify some of those gaps. um, do we have the policy, let's say, displayed on a bulletin board in high traffic areas, which would help with spreading or disseminating that awareness? What other channels could we use? Are we that
Mm-hmm.
could we claim to be 100% in terms of having that?
Oh,
We have
yes.
2,000 plus employees across the organization, so the reach that's required is quite broad there as well. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one piece, the internal audit. And so there were a few items that were identified there, and then it moved to the management review. That's again a requirement as per the standard. And so top management being able to look at the results, the outcome of this implementation, and being able to check as to its suitability, adequacy, and if everything is on track, and to see if there's any
Mm-hmm.
support that's required, which is again an opportunity I see it during that management review to be able to convey challenges that are being experienced, priority areas, um, and so forth. So and we didn't end it there. So in our case, we wanted an external pair of eyes on that act phase from an external audit perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went through that exercise as well, and were able to achieve external auditor certification as well. So
Yes.
I'll see
Yeah.
that's the journey as far as the
Excellent. Thanks
act
very
phase.
much. And that's where BSI came into the picture and got you as a third party. The stage one audit was everything there. Stage two, was it all working? And congratulations. And here we are today. And well, we've got another poll. And the poll questions are: do you think your organization is ready to embark on an implementation journey like this? No, we don't have the time or resources. No, we don't have top management commitment. Yes, but we would need some training. Yes, but we would need some training twice. So you can uh, answer either one of those. Yes, we have begun the journey. And if you have anything else to share with us on this particular question, by all means, let's hear from you in the chat box. And I'll just check over with Karen. Anything in the question box, Karen?
Yeah, we've got a few questions. I'll give you some general ones you could answer before we hit the Q&A. One person wants to know roughly how many organizations in Canada are ISO 50001 certified. Do you have that information?
I do not. BSI does, though. I don't know if Marcella, who's visiting with us today, would have that information, but by all means, just who is ever asking, just fire a note off to BSI. They'll help you out. And you could maybe even Google it or chat GPT it. It might be an answer there.
And do you happen to know if in Canada, since that's where you're located, are there government incentives for implementing ISO
Oh,
50001?
yes. Thanks for asking that question. We have government incentives both at the federal level and the provincial level. And depending on what province you're in, you can actually stack them. Some provinces have a clawback if you've had federal money, but in Ontario, for example, they can stack them. It's a great question. All governments around the world want people to use this standard to reduce their energy consumption and increase their country's record on reaching these climate action goals. Thanks. All right, can we
Yes,
see
sorry,
some
Jim. I
results?
just to add on that, just wanted to mention as well, the city did avail of federal funding
Oh,
for this
excellent,
ISO 50001 implementation
excellent.
as well. So just to
Um,
affirm, it is there.
I don't know if Will knows of any in the U.S. Andrew might, but I think every country is doing itself a favor when they offer those kind of incentives. Germany has mandated that their larger businesses be, and they have a threshold, but I don't know what it is. But they have to be. They've been so it's not just a voluntary standard in Germany; it's a mandatory. It's required by law. So how do the results look here? Well, let's see. Don't have the time or resources. Again, I hope maybe today has encouraged you to go looking for some of those. Don't have top management commitment. And as Tijo mentioned, I wouldn't even start it if top management's not 110,000% behind this, because they have to understand what's required in the standard. Need some training. Excellent. You'll hear about BSI courses if you hit their site, and we've got some people here. 17% have started. And there we go. I will close the poll. In our last section here, Tijo, we're going to be talking about lessons, insights, and lessons learned. Obviously, the insights won't come for a year after you've had it in place for a while, and we've got about 5 minutes left. And I just wondered if you could sort of give us some top level, um, maybe light bulbs that came on, crystallizations that happened. What did you see changing, even either in your actual practices or among people's attitudes towards energy? Did any of that take place that you can recall?
Yes. So from a lessons learned perspective, just before I come to that, Jim,
Mm-hmm.
to that
Mm-hmm.
point, from a lessons learned perspective, just want to mention clearly, if there's going to be a compliance to the standard, if the intent is to conform to the ISO 50001 standard, uh, knowledge of the standard, that's paramount. So having an
Mm-hmm.
understanding of what the standard is requiring for the nomenclature, and so forth. Um, as I alluded to earlier, leadership commitment, and you mentioned that as well, Jim, very vital. So that's important to have. Um, and there's a resource and time commitment aspect that's required
Mm-hmm.
around this as well.
Mm-hmm.
And not least teamwork and cross-functional collaboration that's required for successful implementation. So broad strokes, those are some of the lessons that I can share from the city's perspective in terms of aspects to consider. In terms of things that have changed, there are some things that the standard certainly helped for the city to reflect on. So I'll give an example. There's a section within the standard that refers to organizational context and
Mm-hmm.
looking at
Mm-hmm.
external and internal issues. And so there was awareness across the different departments in terms of the external and internal issues that the organization should consider specific to the energy use aspect. This was an opportunity to look at it holistically and bring everything together
Mm.
under a one-stop document. So that's the way we went about that. So we looked at the provincial aspect, the federal rules, the net zero accountability, right from the Net Zero Accountability Act, the provincial plan in terms of energy commitments that have been made. Um, so um, that all informed. having to document and then having to reflect on that. Where are utility prices going to be? Can we forecast that? How far off can we forecast? Does that come into play? What about the grid mix? How is that going to shift? All these elements require us to come together as a team, formalize that, and document that as well. So I see that as an example to share in terms of where we have certainly made a leap in terms of, okay, we need to be looking at clean regulation, clean
Hmm.
fuel credits on the one end, but on the other hand, we need to look at where the grid would be from a GHG side. What's it that can achieve the highest greenhouse gas reduction and so forth. So yeah, just one example of among others that when you mention in terms of what has changed since the time we have implemented.
Excellent. Thanks so much. And I think it's going to be unique to every organization that goes down this path. But I would imagine there's always going to be something related to communication as well. And then this just general understanding that everyone in the organization would be able to eventually develop and share with each other as well. Not only that, not only sharing with each other in the company or organization, but sharing with your neighbors, any associations you belong to. And of course, then when you start sharing like that, you get to trade information as well. So we've got the last poll, Will. And then Karen has some more questions, I think, for us. How would implementing an energy management system in your organization help? And this one is a multiple. Please select all that apply, but we have unfortunately a single choice format here. So just pick the one that you think you'd want as your biggest benefit to come from implementing an environmental management system. And maybe while we're doing that, Karen can share another question, and then we'll get into the Q&A officially after that.
Here's a question I think that you could answer pretty quickly. This is, I think, for Tijo. Just wondering how much energy/cost savings year on year have you been able to achieve?
Yeah, we are just past the first year of implementation, so our review would come up shortly. So, from the perspective of since implementing the standard, since implementing and conforming to and certifying to the standard, we don't have an annual runway result as yet. But I'll cite an example. We had an aeration project at a site level at a wastewater treatment plant that has just completed and been commissioned as of recently. And the drop that we have been able to identify as far as site level energy use is 25%,
Wow.
just
Wow.
around switching off from. Uh, so clearly, it depends on the nature of the projects.
Mm,
If and so um, I yeah, broad strokes, what that is introduced, we'll know at a site level once we have that annual review. But I would caveat that with saying the nature of the projects clearly drives um, what adds up to the overall site level consumption reduction or
all
at
right.
an organization level.
That's great. Thanks, Tijo. And for all of you who are listening, you can find out those savings if you start with a baseline, and the standard requires that you do that. Get baseline readings on everything, and you'll know pretty quickly. Thanks, and thanks for the question, Karen. And Will, can we see some results? Energy performance, excellent. Improve our legal. Yeah, that happens with a lot of standards. 14,001, 45,001. Ensure continual improvement. And then there were some others there as well. So thank you all very much. And are there some more questions, Karen, that we could have Tijo answer for us today?
Sure. What were Now you've covered this sort of generally, of course, throughout. This is woven through the webinar, but if you had to say one or two, major roadblocks you had to overcome for
Hmm.
this implementation, is it one or two things that stand out to you that maybe you could highlight?
I I would cite, if I reflect on the journey, the one that stands out is data collation and the level of because we are implementing it as a corporate level across a multitude of assets, and to what extent do we have to? So we certainly have utility accounts. We have that information that's being collated. We have an energy management information system that collates that. But then we look at the site level. And at a site level, if it's a wastewater treatment plant, there are a plethora of processes, whether it's the ration bro, whether it's the um, primary, secondary treatment trains, and so forth. Different thing altogether with the pumping stations. If we have water supply, we have the treatment process, and then we have the pumping stations that pump. So there's an energy center there. And then if we look at the buildings, the office buildings and so forth, we have lighting, HVAC, all down to um, the plug loads that are there within that. It was a question of to what level of detail is this capture required? And do we have that level of visibility as far as that? So I think that stood out as, okay, we still have some effort that's required around that in terms of collating, because data is key. Trying to look at it from an objective lens, right, as opposed to subjectively looking at it. It's completely data driven, collating and having that information. So I'll share that as one that stood out and was challenging in when we're trying to identify SCUs or going down that in terms of resolution that we were seeking, and a couple of occasions where we just didn't have that level of granularity.
Excellent. Thanks very much. And I noticed too, Karen, there's a question about the integration between other standards like ISO 9001,
Yep.
14001, and they are all built on what ISO now calls the harmonized structure. So if you have any other standard in place, 9001, 14001, 45001, 27001 information security, 22301 sustainability, they all fit together beautifully. And so to answer that question, absolutely. And that has been a huge improvement in ISO, the whole ISO world in the last, since 2013 when 27001 came out. Anything else you'd like us to address, Karen?
Well, there's a question about Brazil or Latin America that I think it would be difficult for you to respond to. I would recommend that questioner actually refer back to the BSI group website to see if there's information for Latin America on one of your regional websites. The last question that I is a little bit much more speculative, I would say is, what do you see for the future of energy management and sustainability? And I think to kind of reduce the scope on that one a bit, maybe say, for your organization, Tijo, maybe, for your city, having implemented, having gone on this journey, what do you see for yourselves as the future of energy management and sustainability in Guelph?
Yeah, we have the direction set, like I mentioned earlier, from the strat plan. So that's the North Star that we look at from an organization level. And that environmental stewardship is certainly something that the city will and council has provided direction on that, will continue to strive for. But then looking at the horizon, we have interim and end targets, whether it's the 2030 interim target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 63%, or for that matter, the net zero by 2050 objective that I mentioned as well. In the journey towards that, we are looking forward to the standard, the framework, the energy management system that we have created based on that continual improvement framework, to be able to continue to achieve energy performance improvement so that we are moving towards that direction. And it's it's going to require a lot of from a capital perspective, from a planning perspective, and so forth. But yeah, we are on the journey, and we are as it's called, race to zero. we are racing towards that.
Great.
Great. Thanks.
All right.
Any last thoughts, Karen?
No, that was our last question. I found this a very, very interesting presentation. Um, I they say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And, I certainly
Yeah.
see this as being the kind of project
Yeah.
where, your organizational culture has to be relatively mature really before you even think about taking this on. So I think that says something really about the city of Guelph in terms of their organizational maturity, I guess I would say. So I just want to thank both of you, Jim and Tijo, for a great presentation and discussion. And thank you again to our sponsor, BSI Group. That's a wrap for today's webinar. We have tomorrow, for those of you who are interested in the energy management professional certification, we do have some training tomorrow, beginning tomorrow. It's 2 days actually, with Bob Knadler, one of our top instructors. And then our next webinar is March 6th, focusing on, or excuse me, I think that's March 5th, focusing on indoor air quality and ASHRAE 62.1. So thanks again, Tijo and Jim. I really enjoyed it. Very interesting. I learned a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.